Shalom, party people, and welcome to the 12th C. Mr. J.D. Stone, rocking it on my left, 35 pounds. Myself, between the plate carrier and the bag, somewhere around 83, give or take.
More than double.
Well, I also do more push-ups than you do, so it is what it is.
Stronger, better, faster?
No, definitely not faster, and better is a perspective, because I definitely don't think I'm better in my eyes.
Yeah.
So.
And that is true. Objectively, I'm faster than you. So.
Objectively, subjectively, mentally, all of that, yes.
I'm just gonna call it at physically the runs and the bear crawl.
Agreed.
I stumped you on the bear crawl.
You did. You were like halfway up the hill before I was moving too much, but it is what it is. But that's the joys of different people, is that we've all got different areas where we're gonna excel in different shortcomings.
So true.
And you can't do it alone. And speaking of not being able to do it alone, Mr. J.D. Stone, what translation of the Bible do you read?
I use the CJB.
CJB, that's the what, Complete Jewish Bible?
Yes.
Gotcha. I'm relatively familiar with that one. It's not my go-to, but I have a digital copy that I use for reference from time to time. So why do you use that one?
Well, this is written by a Messianic Jew, or
yes.
It's translated by a Messianic Jew. He did the New Testament first, and he thought that he was filling a gap where there were a lot of Gentile, or informally the Goyim, who were not really getting it.
Yeah.
And also there were a lot of Jewish, Messianic Jewish community who weren't seeing the connection as clearly as he could, from a scholarly perspective. So he worked on the New Testament, really driving home the Jewishness of these things. So
quoting one of my favorite musicals, guys, Jesus was a Jew.
Yeah.
Right.
Pretty
Is
much.
what everyone says is like, no, he was Jewish. Like, everybody seems to forget that he was a dude in the Middle East.
And not just ethnically Jewish, like like the racist term Oreo.
Right.
Jewish on the outside, but Greek on the inside or anything like that. No, he was like through and through, 100% soaked in the sauce Jew. So the one thing that just helps me with using that is it changes up the language a little bit. Like,
it's going to use more terms that are on par with people from a Jewish background, because there's a lot of church terms that are
exactly
like really off-putting,
and it gets stale
to people who've grown up Jewish.
Right. And it gets stale when you grow up in the church. You hear these terms all the time, and you're like, this is the only place that I've ever heard this word, disciple, for instance.
Right. Well, and we've talked about this before, that the church word salvation actually has roots in redemption, and there's Torah for redemption and what that looks like, and how it actually ties in quite a bit to what Christ's atoning work did.
Right.
So, like, having those, even if it presents it in something that is functionally equivalent, the fact that it gives it to you in a different format, it makes you pause for a second and think about it a little bit more.
Right.
And so I really do respect that about the CJB, even though that's not my, my go-to or anything. It's a good one.
And then, like with the Old Testament, he said actually the ones that the Jews use.
Yeah.
For the Tanakh and the Torah, it's
going to
really
be
good.
It's going to be more Masoretic text.
Right.
Than if it's.
Yeah, he said the only problem with it was steeped in archaic language. So it's like us using the King James Version. It's
right.
Like it's a good translation. It just doesn't, with the word choices, doesn't resonate with the audience. So he said that one was actually pretty easy to do. You just update the language.
Right.
And then the layout is different. It is according to the Jewish layout. So
yes, I'm very familiar with that layout now. A few months ago I wasn't.
It's quite different, but that organization also that makes you stop and think.
Yeah.
Like, why?
Go left.
Why is it
Never
laid out
mind.
like this, and why did we change it?
Yeah.
Meaning,
Hey, come in.
William.
Yeah. Good morning.
So it's just, there's a lot to think about when using it.
Agreed.
And I appreciate it. And also, like, just the way he lines up, like, it's, I'm English major, I know this. The format that he lines it out can show you that, oh, this was actually poetry, for example, instead of this. It doesn't translate to English. The poetry doesn't translate to English, so we just read it as complete text. It's like, no, this was poetry.
Right.
And that also changes the perception of how you're reading a thing.
Well, there's somebody, I'm trying to remember who, but they redid the Psalms to be poetic, and they did everything they could to preserve the integrity of what the Hebrew was saying. I think so.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact, but I remember reading some of them, and you know, they carry a lot more of the poetic.
Yeah, I don't know how extensive he did, but I do know that John Foreman from Switchfoot has done quite a bit of Psalms, and it's really good.
But yeah, there's good context that's out there. As far as English translations of the Bible, my main EDC is the English Standard Version. It's, call it a crutch or whatever, but it's what I've spent the most time in. It's what I have the most scripture memorized from. Is the English Standard Version the best translation that's out there? No, I don't think so.
It's a rock solid
it's
one, though.
good. It has its biases. There's a lot of people who are very highly Calvinistic that lean on some of the verses the way they're translated in the ESV. But there's also a lot of verses that the ESV Calvinists ignore because they directly refute some of their most staunch points. So it's one of those that it's not like, there's people who say that the ESV is a Calvinist translation. Like, a lot of Calvinists use it. I like the NASB, but it is so hard to read. I think the ESV is a lot more readable, whereas the New American Standard, or no, I'm sorry, the New American Standard Bible is, I go back in it, but what is it? It was the precursor to the ESV, the RSV. There was like an NRSV or something. That one is even more wooden. But like, you legitimately want to know what the word means, that's what it is. Like, it has very, very little thought for thought in it, and a whole lot of word for word. So it makes it, whereas the ESV has more of that thought for thought undertones in the word for word. So they're still trying to, like, this is what the passage context is getting at. So we're taking that into account, but like, the word literally does mean this. So it's not a middle of the road. It's a more to the point word for word, but it's not wooden. And so I respect that. There's one translation that I've been using for a while now, since it was gifted to me, is the Scriptures by the ISR. That one is laid out just like the CJB is, in the context of Old Testament order. It also has Yahweh's name in Hebrew. It also has Yeshua's name in Hebrew.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. And so it is preserving the holiness of the reverence behind their name. And so it carries a lot of respect in the Messianic circles because of that alone. It also tries to transliterate a lot of names and places and concepts. So it's, to a new reader of Scripture, it is not as user-friendly because of that. Because you'll see Metiyahu instead of Matthew. You'll see Shemuel instead of Samuel.
Shlomo.
Yeah.
Yitzchak.
Moshe. You'll see a lot of those. And so it's like, that's not an English word. That being said, you do it for a little bit of time and those names become very recognizable, to the point where they pop up in a cross reference and like you will instantly wait a second. So like if you're actually reading it and not just using it as like reference material from time to time, it starts to really make sense as to why they did what they did.
Yes.
And so I have a respect for that. I will say that the book names on one side are in the English transliteration, and then on the other side are in the, like, we're trying to bring in the Hebrew word for this, but use English spelling. And so that's a little throwing you off, in all honesty, because not only are you used to the Greek order of the Old Testament, but you're also used to the English names of the Old Testament. And so you're looking for Isaiah and it's not where you think Isaiah should be because you're used to one, and then it's not spelled like you think it should be.
Yeah.
So like that does throw you off if you're used to reading the Bible, especially in the Western contexts.
Yeah,
but
CJB has English and then
Hebrew
side by
the
side.
Hebrew transliterated, and so I'm glad that they have that, because reference material wise it's good, but it's also the same thing, like you spend time in it and then it starts to make sense.
Yes.
So it's not like you get lost, but it does take it back. And so for the reading it with fresh eyes perspective, it's awesome, because picking up things that you never saw before, and so that's fun. It does rely on the Masoretic for the source text of the Hebrew, which I agree. I think the Masoretic is a good translation, or is a good, not translation. The Masoretic is a good source document, a good manuscript. That's the word I was looking for. The problem is that the Masoretic and the Greek Septuagint do differ. And there's a few different Greek Septuagints, so it's not like Septuagint is cohesive. Right. There are some differences. What I love about the edition of the ESV that I have, and this is probably why it is still my number one, is I love the footnotes. And don't get me wrong, the copy of the scriptures that I have has a ton of footnotes that are super useful and has a ton of indexes and charts that like, if you don't have those, you're going to be lost.
Right.
But the footnotes that I have in my ESV compare Masoretic and Septuagint side by side. And I love that. I love that. And so it's probably why that particular one is still my EDC Bible. Because where the differences exist, it notes it, and they're like, hey, due to other passages that back this section up, due to scholarly material that is produced from the same time that this was written, and not like modern scholars, I mean like Josephus, like consulting with everything else that is out there, our best guess is this one, but we're still not entirely sure, so we're going to give you both, and you can decide from there.
Well, and sometimes those differences point out something crucial. I mean,
right. Well, so
it's never huge. The difference is never extreme. But
here's one I'll give you. Matthew 17:21. If I'm fairly certain that's the reference, but Jesus is talking to his disciples, and his disciples are wondering why they couldn't cast out this demon, and he tells them that this one can only come out a certain way, and he says prayer and fasting. Well, the oldest manuscripts we have don't say prayer and fasting, and so Matthew 17:21 is omitted from some Bibles, several translations. My ESV, it has it in the footnote, and it says the oldest manuscripts of this chapter This verse is not existent in the oldest manuscripts. However, it is in the vast majority of what is out there. And it is understood by scholars that Matthew probably didn't write that verse, but one of his taught ones, one of his disciples, knew that happened based on conversations that they had had with Matthew, and included it as a marginal note that ultimately got inserted later in translation.
Right.
And they back it up because that same story is going on in Mark chapter 9, if I'm not mistaken, and it does say prayer and fasting.
Right.
So it's there. If it were me, and this is just a stylistic point, if it were me, that verse would be inserted in the text and have brackets around it with an asterisk and then see marginal note. And it would be directly off to the side and said, hey, this verse, while may not have been original when Matthew was writing it, and we're not sure, be aware, we're not sure, but while it may not have been original when Matthew wrote it, this exact passage is talked about in Mark. And it is believed that the later manuscripts that we have in greater number saying that this belongs in here, that it was intended to go here.
Right. I think that's the way it's handled in most of the NIV translations.
It depends on the NIV. You go like NIV 84, maybe. But you go like modern NIVs, like the fact that they didn't rename that translation, it is more than 10% different between your, 2011 NIV and then your update behind it.
Wow.
It's like there's a greater than 10% difference. And so by every definition, that should be a new translation, yet it is still considered the NIV, and they've pulled the NIV 84. The 84, I really respect out of the NIV. The more modern NIVs, I don't have disrespect for. It's just, I don't consider them the NIV because they are that different.
Yeah.
So yes, your older NIVs, yes, I would agree with you.
Well, frankly, I haven't looked at an NIV since 2011. So
Yeah, well, and I would say it's, the NIV and not just the single NIV. So, that is that. But I'm sure you feel the same way about this that I do. I'm a big believer in having multiple translations for reference.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I don't want to get stuck in an echo chamber.
Right.
I don't want to read the same verse the same way and only continue to extrapolate one thing out of it and then realize that there was some subcontext that I completely missed.
Right.
So, I've got that I could lay my hands on in 60 seconds if I dropped my rucksack. I probably have 10 that I could lay my hands on relatively quickly. And if you give me 20 minutes, I could probably lay my hands on 40 or 50 different translations physically in print. So I like having options.
Yes.
Now, some of those translations are a lot weaker than others. I'm looking at you, the Message. Why they call you a translation, I have no idea. That is a paraphrase at best. But
yes.
I will say why I don't throw the Message out is there are some times that the Message hits the nail on the head.
Yep.
100%. But there's a lot of times where it just falls flat. The Message was by one dude, so you're not going to get the same level as having a bunch of people who are debating, no, it should say this and this is why, where they're, quite literally mid-rashing it out.
Yeah.
Now, I have some friends who went to Bible college, and some of their professors were actually on the committees for translating certain books in the Bible. And the professors would be able to go into depth of like, hey, this verse was translated this way. There's another way to read it. This is, that reading, and this is why we went with this one over this one. And those conversations are very fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
So, in summary, have several different translations, even if you have your main squeeze that you go to all the time.
Right.
Go do hard things.